The film begins with a fugitive serial killer Charles Lee Ray fleeing from a detective Mike Norris. Several times, the detective tries to shoot him. His companion runs after watching all of this. To hide, Charles enters a toy store. The detective shoots him again. Charles realizes he is about to die and falls on the toys nearby. They were good guy dolls. Charles is skilled in black magic, which enables him to transfer a soul to another person. He does voodoo chant by placing his hand on a doll and transferring his soul into it. As a result, a storm strikes, and the toy shop is struck by lightning, causing it to explode and entirely destroy itself. However, the detective survives the blast, and in the end, the detective finds Charles's dead body. The scene shifts, and we discover a 6-year-old young boy named Andy, who is celebrating his birthday today. Andy and his mother Karen open the gifts, but Andy is disappointed because he requires good guy doll. On the other hand, a friend of Karen informs her that a homeless man is selling at a low-wage good guy doll. Karen goes out and purchases the doll. Andy is overjoyed when his mother presents him with the doll. The doll introduces himself as Chucky. Karen was now obliged to work the night shift. Karen asks her friend Maggie to look after Andy. At night, Andy watches television. After some time, Maggie puts him to bed. Maggie switches off the television. Maggie finds Chucky sitting in front of a television tuned to a late-night newscast about Charles's death. According to Maggie, Andy is responsible for everything. After Andy falls asleep, Chucky attacks Maggie with a hammer. As a result, she falls from the window and falls on a car, where she dies. When Karen returns, she observes an ambulance and a large crowd of people. She becomes frightened. She pays a visit to Andy, his son. Andy's mother visits the same detective Mike that killed Charles. However, everyone suspects Andy, and Andy finds the doll's footprints there. He informs everyone that Maggie has been murdered by the Chucky doll. Andy informs his mother that Chucky interacts with him and has revealed his real name, Charles Ray. Karen tries to persuade Andy that he shouldn't be doing all of this. Andy refuses to go to school the next day when Karen drops him off. Andy joins Chucky on his journey. All of this was done on Chucky's orders. Chucky takes him to his former accomplice, Eddie Caputo, who has left Charles during detective chasing him. When Chucky gets home, he turns on the gas stove. Eddie hears a noise from the kitchen. Eddie opens the door and shoots, resulting in an explosion. Eddie is also dead now. Andy is once again blamed for the death of Eddie. Andy, on the other hand, claims that Chucky is behind everything, but no one believes him. Andy was admitted to a psychiatric hospital and stayed there for a few days. When Karen returns home, she finds no batteries inside Chucky. For several days, Chucky was operating without a battery. Karen becomes upset and seeks out Chucky to express something. Chucky remains silent and attacks Karen instead. Later, Karen approaches Detective Mike and informs him that Andy is speaking the truth. Chucky the toy is alive. He's doing everything by himself. They return to the same homeless man from whom Karen purchased the doll, and that man informs them that he took the doll from a burning shop. After hearing this, Detective Mike most likely understands and informs Karen that I killed a fugitive serial killer named Charles Ray at this shop. When Detective Mike was seated in his car, then Chucky attacks him, who was sitting in the back seat of his car. The car flips over as a result of his attack. Detective Mike shoots Chucky, who is injured and bleeds. Chucky visits his master, Dr. Death, from he has learned black magic. Chucky claims that he thinks that no one could hurt him now, but he feels pain as a result of the bullet. Dr. Death informs Chucky that he is gradually converting into a human and will continue to do so until he lives in the doll. Chucky informs Dr. Death that he couldn't live in that doll's body for the rest of his life, and that he'll have to figure out a method to escape free. His master Dr. Death clearly negates this, because Chucky becomes an evil man. He also tortures his master Dr. Death there. Dr. Death informs Chucky that he must first transfer his soul into the body of someone he is introduced first of. That was Andy. After stabbing his master, Chucky leaves. Karen later arrives and inquires about Chucky with the Dr. Death. Dr. Death tells Karen everything, including the fact that the only way to kill Chucky is to stab his heart. Later, Chucky approaches Andy, who becomes afraid, while Dr. Ardmore arrives. Chucky, on the other hand, uses an electric shock to murder Dr. Ardmore. Andy runs and returns home, but Chucky pursues and reaches out as well. Chucky knocks him out and begins to perform a voodoo chant, but Karen and Detective Mike arrive and stop Chucky. Chucky attacks Karen and stabs Detective Mike in the foot with the knife. Karen has imprisoned Chucky in a chimney and has asked Andy to burn fire there. Chucky asks Andy to stop and says, "We used to be good friends," but Andy burns the flame. Chucky burns but is still alive and he attacks them. Karen shoots at him, causing his head to separate from his body. Everyone thinks Chucky's dead now, but he attacks him again. But this time, Detective Mike shoots him in the heart and Chucky dies, bringing the first part of the film to an end. Now we will listen to the second part of the Chucky series, where we'll know that 2 years have gone since Chucky's death. Chucky's burnt head was left, but the rest of his body was destroyed, which we saw in the first part. His head is reassembled at a toy company named Play Pals Corporation, because, according to Andy and Karen, Chucky was responsible for all of the murders in the previous part. As a result of this, these dolls have received negative publicity and which affects their sales. That's why the company's CEO, Mr. Sullivan, has to reassure its stockholders that there was nothing actually wrong with the doll. Meanwhile, Andy, now 8 years old, has been in foster care ever since the murders. Karen has been institutionalized for backing up Andy's story about the Chucky killer doll. Mr. Sullivan arrives at the factory where the dolls were made. The technician is thrown at a distance due to a power surge electrocute and dies as a result of it while he tries to adjust Chucky's eyes. Mr. Sullivan orders his assistant Matson to cover up the accident and dispose of Chucky, but they were unaware that Chucky has revived again after this incident. The Chucky doll's goal was to get to Andy as soon as possible. In addition, he needed to transfer his soul into his body. Andy, on the other hand, is shown as someone who hasn't forgotten anything about Chucky. Andy's caretaker Grace gives him to his foster parents to change his surroundings. Andy goes to live with foster parents Phil and Joanne Simpson, who are also fostering Kyle, a cynical, street-smart teenage girl. Joanne sends Andy inside a room, and when Andy unlocks a cupboard door, a good guy doll falls, terrifying Andy. Phil and Joanne try to persuade him that this is only a doll. The doll is thrown by Joanne. On the other hand, Chucky discovers Andy's whereabouts by using Matson's car phone to call Grace Poole, the manager of Andy's foster center. When Chucky arrives at Andy's residence, he encounters the good guy toy that the lady has thrown. Chucky breaks the doll and buried it in the garden. He was doing it to take his place. Chucky pays them a visit. Andy examines the doll, and to satisfy his doubts he checks his batteries. Andy considers this to be a normal doll, and he keeps it with him. Chucky ties Andy's hands and feet while he sleeps. Andy wakes up, and Chucky tells him that he would not leave him this time, and he begins a voodoo chanting to possess him. Kyle enters the room and opens Andy's hands. Andy informs him that Chucky has chased him. They all come to him, but no one believes Andy when he tells them about Chucky. Now Phil has thrown Chucky into a basement. His nose has begun to bleed. Chucky realizes that his body is transforming back into a human once more. When Andy goes to school the next day, Chucky secretly follows Andy to school and defaces his homework, resulting in Andy being assigned detention by Andy's teacher, Miss Kettlewell. When Miss Kettlewell came to check on Andy, Chucky kills Andy's teacher, Miss Kettlewell, by stabbing her with a pump and then beating her to death with a yardstick. But Andy manages to escape. Andy informs Joanne and Phil that Chucky has followed him once more. But no one believes him, and Andy realizes that he must kill Chucky himself. Andy gets to the basement by taking the cutter, where Chucky was imprisoned. Chucky, on the other hand, attacks Andy brutally. As to hear this, Phil reaches out as well. Chucky knocked him down the stairs, and he died as a result. Joanne also appears and blames Andy for Phil's death. Andy is asked to leave by Joanne. Andy was later returned to foster care. Kyle must stay away from Chucky, Andy warns her. Later that night, Kyle swings, and his leg gets entangled with the old doll's leg. Kyle lifts that doll out and realizes Andy was correct when she walks upstairs to inform Joanne, but Chucky has already killed her mother Joanne. Later, he attacks Kyle and asks her to come with him to Andy's foster care. Kyle attempts to kill him on the way, but Chucky is unharmed. Chucky reaches out to Kyle and forces her to drive him to foster care. As soon as he gets there, he starts ringing alarms. The warden Grace scolds Kyle, and Chucky assaults and murders her by stabs, and forces Andy to take him to the Play Pals factory in a paper truck to perform the voodoo chant. Kyle pursues the truck and overtakes it to stop, but Chucky and Andy were not there. They both come inside the Play Pals toys factory. Kyle pursues them to the factory but is unable to find them. Chucky knocks Andy unconscious and begins the ritual. There was no one around to distract him this time. Andy's eyes immediately open. However, the spell fails as Chucky has spent too much time in his doll body and is now permanently trapped. Chucky now recognizes that he will spend the rest of his life in this doll's body. But now, Kyle also reaches there and runs away with Andy. They come across a hallway where they see a roller conveyor. Now they start to climb on a roller conveyor to escape from there. Infuriated, Chucky chases Andy and Kyle through the conveyor, intent on killing them both. Kyle, seal the door. Chucky's hand got stuck in the door, so he pulled his hand away from his body. Then he ties the knife to his severed hand. A worker is assigned to the location to fix a machine. Chucky stabs him with that knife and then puts him in a machine to kill him. On the other hand, Kyle and Andy are trying to kill Chucky. Andy places him in a tub and opens a melted plastic valve on him. Chucky's body also melts down, but he is still not dead and attacks Kyle. Kyle puts a gas pipe in Chucky's mouth. Chucky dies as a result of his mouth filling up and erupting. Andy and Kyle are now out of the factory. The second part of the film comes to an end here. Now we will listen to the third part of the Child's Play series. The Good Guy Doll Manufacturing Company is revealed to be sealed at the beginning of the film. The reason for the company's closure is that we've seen Chucky commit all of the killings in parts 1 and 2. The company has received unfavorable publicity as a result of these murders. 8 years after Chucky's second demise, the Play Pals company resumes manufacturing Good Guy dolls and reopens the abandoned factory. The same factory where Chucky's head was blown is presented to us. The factory was being cleaned, and Chucky's body was visible to be bleeding. A splash of blood from Chucky's corpse is inadvertently mixed in with the plastic being used to produce the dolls, reviving him in a new body. The company's CEO, Mr. Sullivan, tries to persuade the employees that the tale of Andy and the killer doll is no longer relevant. These dolls will provide us with numerous advantages. The first produced doll is given to Mr. Sullivan. It is revealed to us that this is no one else but the Chucky doll. Mr. Sullivan takes the doll home with him. Chucky doll turns on the other toys at night, seeing it. Mr. Sullivan got terrified. Chucky strangles him to death. Andy, who is 16 years old now, and Andy has been sent to Kent Military School after he failed to cope in several foster homes. Chucky's terrifying experiences are still fresh in his mind. Colonel Cochran urges him to forget his fantasies about the doll and focus on the future. Andy arrives for his haircut and is met by Ronald Tyler, an 8-year-old cadet he met at school. Andy sees a television commercial for the Good Guy doll while getting his hair trimmed. Tyler reacts in the same way Andy did as a child. The scene shifts to Andy at the school assembly, where he is bullied by Lieutenant Colonel Brett C. Shelton because Andy is new. Kristen De Silva, a young girl, comes to the rescue. Tyler is asked to deliver a package to Andy's room, but Tyler drops it on the way. Tyler realizes there's a Good Guy doll inside, and he's overjoyed. Tyler takes it to the cellar to open it, and a doll appears out of the box. But Tyler doesn't scare and considers the doll to be advanced. Chucky inquires about Andy. Chucky suddenly realizes that he is in a new body and hasn't told anyone his identity. But remember, he can possess the first person who learns his true identity. Chucky tells Tyler his real name is Charles Ray. Chucky invites him to play a game called Hide and Soul with him. He begins his voodoo chant on Tyler. Before Chucky can enact the ritual, Colonel Cochran interrupts them. He prevents him from playing with the doll and confiscates the doll, throwing it into a garbage truck. Andy's room partner Harold later informs him of the package that was provided to Tyler. Andy denies ever receiving a parcel. Later, Andy starts to arrange his belongings, and Chucky appears under the bed and cuts Andy's leg with a knife. Andy is frightened seeing Chucky because he thought he is dead. Andy uses his shoe to strike Chucky. Later, Brett enters the room, who threatened Andy before, and he threatens him again and returns after stealing his doll. Andy enters his room at night and discovers Chucky's doll, whom he intends to murder. But Chucky had run away from there. And now he goes to meet Tyler, who is playing hide and seek with him. Before Chucky can enact the ritual on Tyler again, they are interrupted by Kristen and fellow cadet Ivers. When the Colonial arrives, they flee in terror, leaving Chucky behind. Later, a knife-wielding Chucky surprises Colonel Cochran, unintentionally shocking him into a fatal heart attack and death. The next morning, Andy tries to convince Tyler that Chucky is evil, but Tyler refuses to believe him. Andy's school's annual war games are ordered to proceed as planned, with cadets divided between a red team and blue team. They could use their rifles, which were paint bullets rather than true bullets in their rifles. Chucky, on the other side, approaches Tyler to ask him to play the game. Tyler understands Chucky is a serial killer, so he stabs him and flees. Tyler makes contact with the blue team Andy. Chucky kidnaps Kristen and asks Tyler's blue team via walkie-talkie to come. Andy and Tyler arrive at the place, led by Chucky. Tyler escapes in the chaos when Andy delivers him to Chucky. Tyler gets to a carnival by running. By reaching there, he tells the security. Andy and Kristen also pursue him in the security room. Kristen snatches the security guard's gun when they see Chucky has already killed a security guard. Tyler is kidnapped by Chucky and forced to ride with him at gunpoint. Andy and Kristen arrive as well, and Chucky fires a shot at Kristen. A bullet strikes Kristen's leg. Kristen gives the gun to Andy, and she asks him to save Tyler. Chucky's face was badly damaged as he was holding Tyler. Tyler collapses after saving himself and faint. Chucky appears and begins to enact the ritual. Andy shoots Chucky's hand, but he can't seem to quit working his ritual. Andy again shoots at his heart, but he is still alive. Chucky tries to suffocate Andy by pushing his hand against his throat. Andy then throws Chucky into a massive metal fan that is part of the attraction, shredding him to pieces and finally killing him. Later, Andy is taken away by the police for questioning while Kristen is rushed to the hospital as the carnival closes down. The film ends here. Here we complete the Child's Play movie series. I hope you like it. Please do subscribe before leaving and share also. Thanks for watching.